This is how you can make realistic fire and smoke in Roblox Studio using particles. Let's begin. Okay, let's begin with how to actually make realistic particle effects. So, all you really need is a flipbook texture like this. Now, you can find this in the toolbox, or you can find it online. I've compiled a decent amount of textures that I'll be linking below in a model. Now, flipbooks can be any size. It can be 8x8, it can be, I think this is 16x4, so it can really be any size. But the more pictures, the higher the frame rate will be. But the texture quality will be lower because the more pictures take up more space on the texture. It's important to find a nice balance so you don't get really pixelated textures. Now let's just begin with the basic settings you'll find. You can add a particle emitter into a part or just into an attachment. If you put it in an attachment, it will be only in that center point. It will emit perfectly in the middle there. But if you add it on a part, you can scale the part and it will distribute it randomly around that, as you can see here. Now, for the particle emitter, just go here, particle emitter, and apply it. You want to import your flipbook into the texture property, and then you want to go down here and enable the flipbook and set it to however much the grid is. This one's a 4x4, so I'll set it to grid 4x4. And the flipbook frame rate, you want it to be as many pictures as you have. So a 4x4 would have 16 frames, so I set this to 16. If you decrease this, the frame rate will be slower and the image will be slower. So if you want a really jittery looking flipbook, that works. Then if you increase it, it will just play it faster. This will result in a smoother looking image and a faster looking one, so you can use that for certain instances. Now for the flipbook modes, loop just means that it will loop. One shot means something, I don't know. Ping pong means it goes back and forth. As you can see here, it goes forward, then it reverses it. And random just means it'll randomly go through the frames instead of just going in order. So, you know, I would just recommend having it on loop for most of these effects. Now, flipbook start random just means it'll start on a random frame. If you have a flipbook that loops perfectly, then I would recommend using this to add some variety. But if it doesn't loop properly, then it will have a little bit of jitter to it, which doesn't really look that good. Okay, now light emission changes how the particle looks, but doesn't actually cast out any light. So for fire, I just recommend having this pretty high. Something like 0.7 to 1 works pretty well. Now brightness, just how bright the texture looks. You can add in a custom color here, just change the hue of it. Now the light influence affects how light influences it. If you set the light influence to 1, however, the brightness will go away. So just be cautious of that. So if you have a point light or you want to make fog, then I would recommend increasing the light influence. Now the orientation just affects how the particle is orientated. So facing camera world up changes the rotation so it always faces the camera. But if you look at it from the top, it'll always just be pointed up. But facing camera just means it'll always face the camera. I would just recommend having the orientation set to facing camera or facing camera world up. Now the size is where you can affect the size of the particle. Now you can just set a number value here if you want. Set it to 1 or 3 or something. There's no limit to these. You can set it to like 2000. It'll just be massive. But if you click on these 3 little dots right here, you get this menu. Now on this side is how it begins. So if you set it to 0, it will scale out. This is where it ends, and this is everywhere in between. So you could make it at 0 for the start and at the end. Then you can drag in another keyframe so it increases in size and then decreases in size at the end. So you get this effect, set all of these. Now for the envelope, this is how much randomness it'll be. So if you set the envelope to 1 and the value to 2, the result could be either 3 or 1 and anywhere in between that because it's a random value. Now you can quickly do that just by holding this little bar here, just increase or decrease that. So adding some randomness through the envelope can create nice variation from the texture. Now the squash is just how compressed or squashed the texture will look. So you set this to 2, you can see it's pretty squished. You set this to -2, it'll flatten. So yeah. Now the transparency, it's similar to the size value. You can set this to like a number, or you can click on these 3 dots and just change the values to how you want it to look. Bringing it to 1 will make it fully transparent so you can't see through it. Setting it to 0 will be fully opaque. So if you don't have an animation that loops properly, I would recommend just making it increase in transparency at the end and at the start so it just blends together a little bit more nicely. Now we'll get into the Z offset later because right now it's not applicable. Now the emission direction just changes in which way the particle will be distributed. But since it's just a thin little part like this, it doesn't really matter. Now, lifetime is how long the particle will stay. So you set this to 3. Let me just increase the size. It'll stay 3 times as long. So if each loop is 1 second, this will stay for 3 seconds. Now, if you increase the rate, this increases how often new particles will be emitted. The rotation, you can set a minimum and a maximum value. This just changes how the particles will be emitted, whether they have a random rotation. So if you just set this to like -30 and 30, you'll see that the textures will start having a random little tilt to them. Rotation speed affects the rotation throughout the animation. So you can see it turn a little bit as it plays. As you can see, they're turning now. Now, speed affects how the particle will move. So if you set this to a couple random values, now it's being distributed up. Set it to 30 and have some really fast ones, and have the minimum at 1, so there's really slow ones. Now, the spread angle determines the angles at which particles may be randomly emitted, measured in degrees, obviously. Now, for the emitter shape, if the emitter shape's a box, then it will be emitted in a box-like shape. If the emitter's a cylinder, it will be emitted in a more cylindrical shape or something, I don't know. If it's like a disc, it will be emitted in a circular shape. If it's a sphere, then it will be emitted outwards in every direction. I would recommend just keeping this as a box. The shape in and out. Outward means it will go up. Inward means it will go down. In and out means it will go up and down at the same time. For acceleration, this affects how the particle moves further into its animation. So set it to 30, it will start slow and then speed up. So this can be used to create nice little smoke trails, like something like that. Just goes up and then slightly moves. Now for these properties, I don't really use them that much, but drag determines the rate at which particles will lose half their speed through exponential decay. If you have lock to part disabled, and if you move it, the particles will respawn slowly and won't stick to the part. But if you enable lock to part, then when you drag it, it will stick to it. That's good for things. Now time scale affects how fast the animation plays. So if you set this to half, you'll see it plays really slowly. But if you set it to 1, everything plays faster. Now, wind affects drag. It's good if you want to use the global wind value to affect how your particles work. So you can just go into wind and then just change how this works. So that's a quick little rundown on all of the properties. Now this is how you actually create these effects. Hey, did you know that not even 5% of people who watch subscribe? So if you found this video genuinely helpful, then it would mean a lot if you could help the channel grow. Back to the video. Let's start with fog. Now, create a fog-like effect like this. Just a quick little weird looking volumetric. It looks better at night. You can see that these lights affect the fog. So the way you do this is just create a large little plane, add a particle emitter, make the size really big. You can create a curve like this, and then set the transparency to very high, fading out at the beginning and the end. This way you can see through the fog a little bit. To get really dense fog, you want to increase the lifetime a lot and increase the rate a lot. Now this will probably cause a bit of lag if you have a massive scene with this. Then you want to set a random rotation, make sure it rotates a little bit, and add just a little bit of speed so it spreads out a little bit. Now for this effect, if you want like a foggy little scene, you do most of the things you did with this one, but just decrease the transparency even more. So that's pretty cool. Now if you wanted something like this, now the downside of using particles is that it can take a while to get to its full effect, so just be aware of that. But if you want these clouds-like effect, what you can do is just have a whole lot of volume surrounding the main scene, but not actually over it, just around it, and do the same thing you did with this area right here, just on a larger scale. You want to increase the size of these to be massive. Then yeah, you can also add in these little point lights. This just creates a nice little lighting effect. Just add some more depth to the scene. Yeah. Okay. Now to create these nice little fire and explosion effects, basic principle is basically just having a lot of the same effect with a little bit of speed, a little bit of acceleration, and have it fade out. So for this one, these are the settings I used. You want to start a little smaller and get a little bit larger at the end. And you want a lot of variation between the points. Same thing for transparency. You want to start completely transparent and make it visible, then make it fade out at the end as if it was smoke. I'm going to move on from this since it's not amazing. Move on to this one. This one's 5 effects stacked together. That's how you create really nice looking combinations. Now it starts with a small layer. This one is just a layer of fire like this. Doesn't need to be that dense. Then it's a beginning explosion effect. Then it's another explosion effect at the top just to create a little transition. And then it's a smoke trail at the very end. Just have it slowly fade out. Okay. Now, specifically, these are the effects I used. For this bottom one, just have the size massive, but have a slight variation. Have the transparency fade out as it gets towards the end of the animation. Just increase the rate a lot so there's a lot of explosions, but make sure the lifetime set at 1 so it doesn't loop multiple times. And just add a slight little amount of Y acceleration so it goes up a little bit, and a little bit of X variation and Z variation if you want it to head a certain direction. Now, I would recommend decreasing the time scale of all of these animations because they play just too fast normally. If you decrease that, it'll look like a smaller fire or larger fire. Now, for the second one, it's basically the same thing. You just want the size to be pretty high. You want the transparency to fade out. And it's basically the same principle, just with a different texture and slightly higher. Then you want the fog. The fog works slightly different. It's not an actual fire texture, so it doesn't need any light emission. The size, you want it to be massive. Transparency, you want it to fade out too. I personally like having the fog more transparent than these other textures, so it sits at the back more. Then increase the acceleration more. And since this will be smoke, you want to increase the lifetime to have a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 3. The higher the lifetime, the further out it will trail, but it can create these weird little gaps that don't look too great in my opinion. Increase the rate a lot and all of that stuff. Now, a nice little trick you could do is adding a little light at the bottom. This just causes this effect, which I think looks better, looks more lit up, like the fire is actually causing some light. I think it just looks a little bit more realistic with that nice little light fall off. Also, if the effects aren't stacking properly, as in you want the fire to show up before all these other effects, what you can do is increase this Z offset. So the higher the number, the closer it will appear to you. So let's just, for example, select this smoke. If I increase it to like 10, it will appear in front of all the other effects. So you want to order this, set the smoke to 0, then just increase it as the effect goes on. So you want the fire to be at like 10, and then just layer it. Okay, now for this effect. This effect follows a lot of the same principles as the other one, but let's start with the base here. This is just one fire plane mixed with another fire plane, just to create a nice little gradient and add some cool little variation to it. Then at the top here is a smoke plane, because without it, the scene just feels a little more empty. So adding a little bit of smoke makes it look quite a bit better and quite a bit more realistic. Now the smoke's pretty similar to the other one. It's just playing at a faster speed since it's a smaller flame. And yeah. Now, having all of these particles does cause some lag, as you can see. So I would just be aware I wouldn't add this much. Now for this window, it's just a fireball. It's a square with a whole lot of fire texture. But since this texture loops, you can increase the lifetime a little bit, increase the rate. Don't need to go over the top with it or anything. Then you can add in a light, and this just adds some nice little light emission. So it creates a cool little effect as if the fire was actually casting light. For the roof, it's the same principle, but you can add some more smoke since it's all of this area as opposed to this little smaller area. Just looks a little bit better. And yeah, I'll be linking all of these in the description if you want to look more into it or use it in your own builds. You're welcome to do that. Anyways, goodbye now.